if you're not supposed to be here, just maybe hide your camera or something. Um, yeah, great. Hello. So my name's Connor, and I just want to present to you here this sort of new project that I'm working on, which is called Healing from Irishness. And I'm basically you might know me as an author, or you might know me from Instagram, or maybe my podcast. I don't know where you've heard of me or come in contact with me, but just as way of a little introduction, I work as a coach, and that's kind of what I do, and I have coached kind of like a huge multitude of people from different backgrounds. But in the last couple of years, my focus has almost exclusively been Irish people. And before I was a coach, uh, the work that I did for most of my life was actually as a bartender. So from around the age of 15 up until my 30s, I worked in bars all over the world, and including places like New York. And I'd say that's where I kind of began to understand some of the first things about Irish people and our connection to our emotions and our feelings. And so that sort of has been part of my focus recently. What I have noticed with Irish people, and especially the coaching sessions that I do with Irish people, is that we tend to present with the same issues. It's a little bit like we've all grown up in the same family. I'll speak to Irish people who are living in Ireland. I'll speak to Irish people who are maybe like third generation over in Australia or in the States or wherever. And some of the things they're coming up against over and over again are always the same. And so I've started to kind of just put this all into a practice. I've started to put it all into a kind of a program, like a healing package. And that's what this whole healing from Irishness thing is. And what I notice when I notice with Irish people, with us, is that there are three main areas where we tend to slip up. There's three main areas where we have difficulty. And sorry, there's some more people coming into the waiting room still. The number one area that we often have difficulty with is boundaries. We have a really hard time saying no. We have a really hard time protecting ourselves. Um, I know this also from my own life where I've had horrible difficulty with boundaries. In fact, I remember being in a relationship, and rather than actually just saying no to the person, I took a job in Afghanistan for 2 months to avoid that whole situation. So that's maybe an extreme example, but in other ways, we're kind of loaded with guilt as well. That's the other thing that so many of us have. We have this guilt. I can remember as well, like one situation, I was rear-ended when I was driving my car, and the first thing I did is I got out and I said sorry to the person who drove into the back of me, even though it was completely their fault. And so we have this sort of boundary problems, we have this guilt problem, but then we also have this emotional repression that so many of us have where we cannot access our emotions. We are somehow trapped in a kind of a little prison of non-feeling. And what happens to so many of us is that we have this kind of these individual situations, this kind of a traumatic response to so many situations. And it leaves us feeling isolated. It leaves us feeling that, oh, I'm the one who has the problem. Like everybody else is out there living their life, doing their thing, getting on with it. But here I am, I'm all alone in my particular problem. But what I've noticed from working with Irish people and people of an Irish background is that the one thing that really connects us is this conditioning. is our Irishness. It's not our culture, it's not our capacity to sing, it's not our storytelling. It's the learned behaviors, the learned adaptations, our strategies for survival. And we are connected with all of this. It's the one thing that truly unites us as a people. And this is why I think it's so important that we can do our healing as a group, that we can begin to recognize, this isn't me. I'm not deficient on my own. What I'm actually experiencing here is part of a much bigger collective conditioning. Um, so what I want to do is I want to just read out a little list to you. And while I'm reading this list, I'd love you just to see, does it feel like this applies to you or not? So this is just a list of the typical things that are involved with our Irish conditioning. Um, you can treat this a little bit like bingo if you want. You can like tick the boxes. I read them out and see who wins. So we apologize when it's not our fault. Um, we often we'd rather die than make a scene. Actually, I have a client um who tells a story about her mother going to a concert and her mother had a cough. And her mother was so scared of coughing in the space that she ended up passing out and had to be carried out of the concert by four people, and the concert had to be stopped. So, in her effort to not make a scene, she ended up stopping the whole concert. And another thing that we have is we avoid directness. We try and hint our way through life, especially in relationships. We're so terrified of saying, I would like this, or can I have this? So instead, we kind of do all these subtle gestures and hints and suggestions rather than actually say what we want. I lived in Germany for 10 years. I worked over in Germany for 10 years, and I was shocked by the rudeness of Germans who could just ask for what they wanted rather than beating around the bush about it for days instead. Um, and speaking of being shocked and directness, we find honesty is harsh, you know. So when someone is honest with us, it comes across to us as really harsh, as really rude. We're so we've become so used to just playing around with the truth and sugarcoating things and avoiding that whenever we encounter honesty, it feels quite brutal. It feels harsh. We have this habit um, of saying we're fine or we're grand when inside we're slowly collapsing. And this again, this is just another thing that kind of leaves us isolated and alone. The other thing too is we're deeply suspicious of joy, especially when we encounter it ourselves. We're suspicious of it in other people, but we're even more suspicious of it in ourselves. And that's because the legacy of our history is one where we're always expecting the other shoe to drop. You know, we're waiting, when's the next tragedy coming along? So when we're in a place of joy, rather than surrender to joy, we worry that there must be a black cloud coming after the silver lining. One of the hardest things as well for us is that we think rest must be earned. We actually think most things must be earned. This is all connected to our low sense of value. We think love must be earned. We think friendship must be earned. We think anything positive must be earned. There isn't this sense in many of us that just good things happen to us because we're good people. No, everything must be worked for. Everything must be earned. Um, and on top of that, we interpret calm as laziness. You know, if someone is calm, if someone is not stressed, if someone is not, um, if someone is even taking care of themselves, well-being, self-care, we often look on those things as lazy or indulgent. And all of this comes down to the level of shame that's inside of us. We have so much shame that ends up just sort of filtering its way into work ethic. We're kind of famous for being very hard workers. The reason we're very hard workers is because we're full of shame. So we're always trying to prove ourselves. We will do more than others because we believe that we're starting off from minus. Same thing happens in our relationships. We'll give more. We don't feel comfortable when we're taking. We feel more comfortable giving because the shame says, well, I'm not really worthy for nice things. I'm not really worthy of love. Um, and speaking of love, we often end up in chaotic relationships because that feels more familiar to us than a calm, loving relationship. As many Irish people, we come from a background of intensity. And so we often look for intensity in relationships. And when that intensity isn't there, when that chaos isn't there, we kind of go, oh, this doesn't feel right to me. Um, we, our other big thing is that it makes it so difficult for us to express our gifts because we're so scared of being seen as too much. Everything for us, anything for us that is expressive, different, that makes yourself, that brings the spotlight to you is too much. And so it's so difficult for us to ever step out of what is a national mediocrity. Mediocrity? Mediocrity. We're stuck in this place of feeling, okay, if I'm in the middle, if I'm mediocre, then I'm safe. The difficult thing here is that we as Irish people, or people who have Irish genes and Irish backgrounds, is that we have such deep gifts. We have gifts of creativity and sensitivity and expression. And these gifts are our way of healing. They're our tools for like moving through life. Yet we're terrified of expressing these gifts for fear of standing out, for fear of appearing like we're too much. And the last thing on this long list of ills is that we never really feel entitled to great things. And so we always kind of accept a dose of misery. Now, I know this can sound like a kind of an archaic list. It might even sound like it's a lot of doom, but I notice this as in a range when I'm working with Irish people and with my Irish clients, is that all of these things that I've said here show up in different forms at different ranges. And what they do is they contribute to an unhappiness in us, a lack of satisfaction with our lives, a sense that I could be doing something else, but I'm not, and I don't know why. And what I believe is that all of these things, when we look at them as like individual problems, it can feel very damning. But when we begin to connect to the idea that, this is a collective conditioning, this is a product of my Irishness, a product of all the 100 years of my thousands of years of my ancestry, the message that was passed down in a land that was so heavily traumatized. And so all of these things that are kind of our conditioned sense of Irishness today are just survival strategies. You all know yourself, when you're in a state of survival, it's very difficult to be happy. It's very difficult to connect to joy. I feel that the Irish genes inside of you and inside of me are still braced in this position of how do we survive? And so that prevents us from really living out these creative, beautiful lives that we deserve to live and that aren't so hard for us to live. It's just a matter of seeing things in new ways. At the moment, we see things through this lens of Irish conditioning, but a little bit of work and a little bit of understanding, and you can begin to see things in a completely different way. Um, so this is where I've created a course, and the course is called Healing from Irishness. And the course is basically, it works in like four parts, right? The first part, as I've just kind of talked about there, is just beginning to recognize, okay, my Irishness. This is the reason that I'm acting this way. This is the reason I find it so difficult to spend money. This is the reason I find it so difficult to like find myself beautiful. This is why I find it so difficult to ever say no to my family, to ever just do anything on my own, to travel solo, and so on and so forth. We begin to notice, okay, the reason I'm not doing these things, it's not because I'm deficient as a person, but it's because my ancestors' messages are living inside my body today, and I'm reacting to history rather than the present. So once you can begin to recognize that, it all starts to crumble. Once you begin to sort of see through the lies, through the illusion that's inside of you, it doesn't really have the same grip as over you anymore. The next thing we do in this course is we really begin to feel all the unfelt things. So, in order to sort of survive in this conditioning sense, we have to block a lot of our feelings. In order to be mediocre, you have to block all of your dreams, desires, and wants. You have to repress them. In order to get along with everybody and people please and be nice, you have to kind of swallow a lot of your anger. It's interesting. The Irish have a reputation for being temperamental and stuff, but I think we're actually the most repressed when it comes to our anger. That's the one thing we could do with letting out more of. So, a big part of this is beginning to feel your feelings again, all of the feelings, and maybe even not just your feelings, but the feelings of your whole family, the feelings your mother never got to express, your grandmother, your grandparents. And then the next part, once you've recognized this, is beginning to rebel against your conditioning. So if your conditioning says, don't be too much, part of this course is you learning to be too much. If your conditioning says, no, you shouldn't spend that amount of money on an item of clothing, then part of this course is helping you to rebel so you do spend that amount. So you do buy the shoes that you've always wanted to wear. You go on the holiday you've always wanted to go. You start the business you've always wanted to start. It's about you rebelling against the survival strategies of your ancestors because your gift to them is stepping out of survival and living a beautiful life, the beautiful life that maybe they weren't able to. And then this is the last part of the course. It's all about reclaiming joy. Your birthright as an Irish person is to live from a place of joy. We are a naturally magical people. We have this deep connection to nature and humor and art. And this brings so much joy into us. But the joy is sealed by this fear of what might happen next. We put a lid on our joy. And I feel that that's just some historical hangover that we need to loosen. So I almost didn't make this course. And the reason I didn't make this course was because I could feel that lid of Irishness on top of me. The fear of, oh, I will be too much if I make this course, or the fear of what will people say if I make this course, or the fear of what happens when I start to express. Will I be put back inside my box? And once I realized all that fear that was around this course, then I knew that I had to make it. Like there was no way I couldn't make it. And so this course, in a way, is sort of part of my healing. And when you do the course, you'll create something, and that'll be part of your healing too. And so this is how the course works. You can do it on your own time. You can do it in about a month. You could do it in maybe a year. It's based around five important lessons. And each lesson brings you through things like shame and guilt and living your true life and connecting to your purpose. And with each section, there's a video, there's a workbook, and there's these visualization meditations where you begin to just reprogram. You shake yourself free of the conditioning. And then on top of that, there's a community. So it's Irish people all over the world are connected through this forum where they're just talking about their own wins, their own conditioning, and what they've experienced. Um, and what I feel and what my hope is when I think of Ireland and I think of the amount of struggle that's happened in Ireland in order to get freedom at a geographical sense, freedom for the land. Yet so much of the lack of freedom is something that we carry and continue in ourselves. We're not really at free people on our own. We don't really feel free to do what we want to do. So my hope with this course is that we might be one of the first groups of Irish people to truly become liberated. And by liberated, I mean we don't care what other people think. We we move to the beat of our own drum. We shake off all of the shame and all of the guilt that has followed us and our family for generations after generations. And we finally learn to relax and be happy and connect to joy. Um, and that's mostly it, I think, in a nutshell. There's a couple of comments there in the chat. I'm going to just have a look at them. Um, what are people saying? Yeah, Ashkan with ancestral trauma. Thank goodness, yeah, amazing. So that's pretty much it. And that's the course. The course is it's 132 euro. The 32 is there for a reason. And but if you book it by Wednesday, it's 25% off. And if anybody has any questions or you'd like to say anything, you can do that now. Or if not, I'll just let you guys all run off into your weekend. Ah, Karina, I remember. Yeah, I remember your name. Thanks, Karina. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Amazing. Well, I'm going to send this video out tomorrow with a discount link as well for the course. So if you're curious and you'd like to do some work on this, I feel like it's very new work. I feel like so far in Ireland and in the Irish community, we haven't really begun to address this. I think in many ways we kind of swept our trauma under the carpet, but you can't really sweep trauma anywhere. It lives inside of us until we look at it. So I really, really, yeah, I feel the time for this is very right. So thank you so much for showing up. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all again. And good night. Bye bye. Slán.